Good evening, everyone. We are about to get started. If I can ask everyone to have a seat. We're just waiting for a few more people to come in, and we'll get started. All right, good evening again. My name is Leslie. I am the manager for Island Space Caribbean Museum. Start off by telling you guys welcome to our space. By show of hands, how many people have been here before? Not in this space, but in the last one. Well, welcome, and thank you so much for being here. We put our heart and soul in this space, and we want to make sure that you get to enjoy it because it is here specifically for you. This evening, we have the privilege of hosting Dwight Maxwell's event, his book launch. Clap it up for him. Yes, and the reason why it's so important and we're so happy that he chose this space is because our goal is to educate the people about the Caribbean, right? We are the only Caribbean museum in the entire world. There are no others like this. You have one for Bahamas, you have one for Haiti, but we as a whole tell the story of the Caribbean people in our own voice. So having him here doing something extremely similar, it just correlates with the message that we like to push here, and we're so grateful that he chose here. And thank you, of course, the Commissioner Arlene Maxwell. Everybody say hello to her. She has been a great supporter of the museum, and we're always grateful for her. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our co-founder of this space. Her name is Dee Thompson, and she will be our host for the evening. Enjoy. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for our look into the mind of author Dwight Maxwell, who is the gentleman behind It's Not Just About Grades, It's About Culture. And we're going to explore some fascinating things and ideas this evening. I will go ahead and introduce him. Please forgive us for the echo that you're hearing from these screens, but we're trying to live stream, and that's a technical difficulty for the folks out there in the world. All right, tonight's conversation is going to center on a bold and urgent argument that our children's struggles in school are far less about ability and more so about culture. Dwight Maxwell, an educational scholar with more than 25 years of teaching experience across the US and UK, has spent his career examining how racially biased monocultural curricula, you can explain what that means to us, right? Undermine the potential of Black, African, Caribbean students. In his book, It's Not Just About Grades, It's About Culture, he exposes how white monolingual teaching practices shape identity, motivation, and achievement in ways most parents and educators never see. Maxwell also offers transformative alternatives, so it's not just complaints and solutions as well, right? From restoring cultural identity in the classroom to using Adinkra symbols as a framework for unlocking a child's purpose and resilience. His work challenges long-held assumptions and provides a path toward educational liberation. And I'm excited to share and explore these ideas with you tonight. Dwight Maxwell. Thank you.
you very much. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here this evening. This is highlight and a really a landmark for me in terms of my teaching career and in terms of my writing and my professional development. And I'm really happy to be here at the Island Space Museum. It's the perfect venue for this book. The Caribbean Museum, the only Caribbean museum in the country. So that's a big deal. And that in the world? Oh, wow. Okay, so the only Caribbean museum in the world. This is a remarkable occasion. And we're living in a time where I believe, and I've noticed that our educational system is still anti-Black in many respects. We just have to look at this administration's policies towards African American culture and Caribbean culture in general, and Africans in general, and the Caribbean. And we know that the Caribbean is under assault at the moment with Venezuela and so on. Okay, yeah, so this book is a long time coming. It's been, I'm going to begin by reading from it. So give me, bear with me as I read from the book, just so you can have a taste of what's in it, and not just what's in it in terms of the content and the information, the research, but also this is my pride and joy because of the way it's written as well, the way it's written. The book was written during lockdown. And remember, guys, remember lockdown? Yeah, man, the book was written during lockdown. We all had a lot of time to think during that period. So it gave me a chance, because the book was a long time coming. So I had lots of research done. And then during lockdown, I had the opportunity to put it all together in this book. All right. So I give thanks to my wife, Jennifer Maxwell, for supporting me through this process. And my son, Dwight, okay, for putting up with me as I was writing the book. All right. Late nights, okay, and being miserable, but getting it done, right? Okay, so let me begin. Sitting down. Okay, so I want to begin by looking at the first chapter of the book. Now, one of the things about this book is that, as Khalif says, it's not just a complaint about the educational system and how it's disenfranchising our children. It's also an offer solution. So throughout the book, you'll find lesson plans. So if you purchase a copy and you want to implement some of the ideas that are mentioned in the book, you can do so because the lesson plans are included in the book. Now, one of the things, if you notice on the cover of the book, there's an Adinkra symbol. And that's Dweminian Adinkra symbol. Adinkra symbol is from Ghana. I'm going to go into it a little bit. And that's basically two horns colliding. And that I thought that would be a good symbol to use on the cover of the book. As this is, it's not talking about violence or anything like that. When horns are colliding, it's talking about two ideas clashing but bringing about something new. Okay, so that's why Adinkra symbols are so powerful. Okay, so I'm going to start off by just talking about the racially biased curriculum, first of all, and then I'm going to segue into the data. Okay, I'm not going to bore you too much with it, but the data, because you need to know that this is based off actual factual things that are going on in the world. So I'm not making it all up. And then we're going to talk about what Adinkra symbols are and how you can use them in your lives. Okay, so let's begin. Chapter 1, Introduction to the Racially Biased Curriculum. It is 1960s Britain, 12 years after the first group of Black immigrants from the Commonwealth disembarked the HMT Windrush. A child of the Windrush generation sits docile in a predominantly white British classroom in Brixton, London. It is a school for the subnormal, a school designed for children with learning difficulties, and somehow Black children of Caribbean descent were disproportionately represented in these schools. It was discovered later that the vast majority of Black children were deliberately misdiagnosed as ESN, which means educationally subnormal, by a racially biased London school system. The Inner London Education Authority noted in 1967 that 28% of children in ESN schools, 28% were immigrant. And in 1973, a DES letter to all local authorities confirmed that although immigrant children nationally comprise only 2.4% of the total school population, 5.4% were in special schools, with West Indian children 4 times overrepresented in ESN schools. In Greater London, West Indian children comprise a quarter of all the children in these schools. This injustice was later revealed in the year I was born, 1971, by Bernard Cord in his tell-all book, How the West Indian Child Was Made Educationally Subnormal in the British School System. This highly politicized book caused a social and political storm across the nation by exposing the educational inequalities and institutional racism in the British educational system through the lens of the country's educationally subnormal schools, previously called schools for the mentally subnormal, which disproportionately and wrongly enroll Black children, especially those from the British Caribbean community. These students rarely advanced out of ESN schools and suffered educationally and economically. Cord also intentionally made a critical decision to write specifically for an audience of Black parents, which is also the goal of this book, because I believe the matter of Black children's education primarily rests in Black parents' hands, and it is about time Afro-Caribbean parents take full responsibility for how their children are educated and how this is impacting their children's consciousness and well-being. It is well documented that Black children excel at primary school in Britain and the US, but somehow their focus and determination significantly decline at the secondary school and college level of the educational progression. This phenomenon has been ignored for decades, and sadly, Black children have been left to sink or swim in a school system that has been proven historically to be racist and ill-prepared to teach them. This is why I have begun my introduction to this book by appealing to the reader's imagination, asking you to visualize a bright-eyed and bushy-tailed Black boy with hopes and aspiration drilled into his imagination by his Caribbean parents, who will not let him forget the reason why they emigrated to the UK. But from the beginning, he is determined, he is discriminated against by the adults entrusted to educate him. He is no different from his white or Asian classmate, except that he would most likely face numerous acts of racial prejudice through his childhood all the way into his adult life. He has less of a support network when compared with peers from more dominant cultures. He is just as excited to learn about who he is and to gain a more comprehensive understanding of how he came to be here in England. He's excited to know about the origins and culture of his people, their accomplishments and contributions to British society. In this lesson, before there was ever a Black History Month, he's about to embark upon a course of study that would probably taint his sense of self and produce more insecurities, doubt, and self-hate than he left home with that morning. The sum of his academic experience will be westernized entirely, with very little learning about the history and culture and tradition of his culture and traditions. In addition, being placed in an ESN school in the late 1960s have severely lessened his chances for success, and his prospects of finding a middle class job to raise himself out of poverty are now limited in a culture that places a strong emphasis on GCSE's results, leaving him little chances of escaping the stereotypes and tropes the dominant culture has labeled him with. Of his peers, he is the most disenfranchised economically, socially, and spiritually due to his personal intersectionality, which this book will explore in more depth in the preceding chapters. Whereas his Asian peers are firmly rooted in their language, traditions, religions, and culture. Kwesi is an African born in a colony thousands of miles from his ancestral home and far removed from his ancestral African culture by 400 years of separation. Physically, he appears to be African on the outside, but within his consciousness rages, within his consciousness rages an internal struggle that threatens to tear him apart. His double consciousness sets him apart from his peers, as he is Western by culture, but African genetically and spiritually. Cord's seminal book not only exposed the racism in British schools, but he also tackled the resulting trauma that is brought on by racially biased education and the impact this has on Black children across the country. He identified 3 factors that were causing Black boys, in particular, to fail. Firstly, low expectations on his part about his likely performance in a white control system of education. Secondly, low motivation to succeed academically because he feels the cards are stacked against him. And thirdly, low teacher expectation, which affect the amount of effort expended on his behalf by his teacher. And also, this also affects his own image of himself and his abilities. In It's Not Just About Grades, About Culture, I added one more factor, which I believe, from my teaching experience, is absolutely vital and necessary, not just for Black children, just Black children's success, but for every child being educated in the school system, and that is the critical dynamics and role that culture plays in developing the hearts and minds of young people. So perhaps this is Kwesi's first real encounter and exposure to the history curriculum. And maybe he's already anxious because he already has some vague, ominous feeling about what the curriculum entails for him and his kind. Up to this point in his education career, he has only learned about British culture. As I mentioned at the start of this chapter, he is tense, anxious, and nervous because even though he has not been taught the fullness of African history and culture at home, he has some awareness of slavery and some vague idea of his ancestors, of how his ancestors were trafficked across the Atlantic in pirate ships by British, French, Portuguese, and Spanish slavers who treated his people as if they were merchandise, property, and possessions as they sailed across the tumultuous Atlantic Ocean in one of the largest human trafficking scandals known to man. This is common knowledge to every child in the classroom, no exceptions. The abundance of Hollywood slave narratives broadcasted on television, on the big screen of movie theaters, ensure that most children with a television, no matter where they are in the world, are certainly familiar with slavery and the servitude of Africans who suffered at the hands of their white colonial masters in the West Indies, North and South America, and on the continent of Africa in regions like the Congo, Nigeria, and South Africa. Kwesi will learn then this brutal, appalling trade in human beings involved tens of millions being forcibly removed from their homes, betrayed by neighboring tribes who fought to tip the balance of power in their regions with new weapons given to them by the white man in exchange for sacking and burning the villages of their enemies and shackling their men, women, and children in chain gangs, dragging the defeated enemies to the coast to meet their captors. The fact is, when Education Secretary Michael Grove announced he wanted to refocus the teaching of history in schools to celebrate the distinguished role of these islands in the history of the world, he also removed the curriculum's explicit focus on racial and ethnic diversity, particularly within Britain. This made the teaching of Black history optional, as he left it up to schools to decide whether they would teach and explore African history. And of course, in the majority of schools in the UK, teaching Black history was limited and shallow and dreary and predictable, with a narrow focus on the transatlantic slave trade and a pat on the back for white men such as William Wilberforce, whose efforts, according to the history curriculum, freed African slaves from servitude by appealing to his fellow politicians in the House of Parliament. And it is true that Wilberforce did appeal to the conscience of the members of Parliament to end the abominable slave trade. But it was not his entreaty alone that turned the tide of enslaved Africans. Many historians cited rebellions among the enslaved and the ever-increasing population of African on the island as the chief reason leading to the ending of the slave trade. Heroes like Nanny of the Maroons in Jamaica and the Haitian Revolution and numerous slave rebellion in the US had placed the entire European slaveholding nations in a state of heightened alert regarding their African captives. Okay, so that is the opening of the book. So hopefully that whet your appetite a little bit as to what it entails. Do I have a bit more time to share something else? I'm gonna share a little bit more. Okay. Okay. So that bit there is talking about the curriculum and how that is impacting the children, especially Black children. And this is from the 60s about the school for the subnormal. But what we have to understand is that that curriculum hasn't changed much. All right, so our students are still exposed to that curriculum. More and more, we're seeing improvements in terms of how the curriculum of how African culture is being taught, and we're seeing now that there is a emphasis on the civil rights movement, but there is nothing pre-slavery, and we know African history is vast, and that what they're covering in the school is just very minuscule. And is not, actually not the correct representation. Now, let me just share one more little bits with you before the interview starts. And this part has to do with I want to talk to you about Adinkra symbols, because that's one of the keys of the book. And this is one of the tools that I'm hoping that parents can use to make a difference in their child's education. So this is something that parents can be doing at home, or if a teacher takes up this book and decides to implement some of the things in it, it can be done in a school environment. Okay, so I'm just gonna give you a brief. I want to touch on some statistics about why I wrote this book in the first place, besides the racially biased curriculum, and then go to a deeper symbol very quickly. Okay, so just some statistics on what is going on currently. So I don't know if people are aware, but since the end of segregation in America, and the beginning of integration, that Black Americans have consistently achieved lower than all other racial groups in this country, Asians and whites. Let's say we're going to look at Asian Americans, and that includes South Asians, East Asians. So your East Asian would be your Chinese, Japanese, Koreans, etc., but mainly Chinese because they're the larger population here. And Koreans are big too, and Japanese too. But then you have Indians, So when we say Asians, we mean all of the Asian groups. So South and East Asians, they are at the top of in terms of achievement. They are at the top, and they've consistently been there. Now you got to look at the fact that Asians came to this country much later than African Americans, who came here 400 years ago as slaves. And but Asians have come here and they now dominate Harvard's enrollment. They make up 40% of Harvard's student population, over 40%. That's huge, right? Then the rest is whites, who are many of them are legacy admissions, right? So they have fathers and mothers who went to Harvard, and then they most of them don't do nothing, right? And then of course you have the Black population that makes up about, it used to be about 18%. It's dropped now to about, at one point it hit 18%, but that was a record. I think Harvard admission now has dropped significantly for African Americans. And when I say African Americans, I mean Black, all Blacks, Caribbean, Nigerians, wherever, So keep in mind that on the SATs, for example, and I'm just going to read a little bit about that. On the SATs, for example, Black students, African Americans, score at least 100 points or 200 points below Asians. Okay, so at least 200 points. That's a lot on maths and on English. Okay, so you got to keep that in mind. Now, the question is, you need to ask yourself, this is not how God created the situation, right? But it's turned out this way. And we have to ask ourselves, why do our children consistently score lower than other groups? And the answers are in this book. And if you read, I'm just going to drop some statistics on you quickly. Of all the students who took the GCSE in England, and this happened in England as well, so this book is covering UK and the US. In 2020 to 2021, only 50% achieved eight GCSE subjects or higher. So if you're Jamaican, you understand what that means. 55.8% of South Asians students in England achieved 8 GCSE or better. Of the group, 62% were Indian. We're talking about South Asians here, and 69% were Chinese, of Chinese background. So Chinese consistently blow everybody else out of the water, okay? Only about 50% of whites achieve 8 or more GCSEs in England. And around 52% of Black African, and when we say Black African, we mean Nigerians or Ghanaians, achieve 8 GCSE or higher, so that's 52% of them, compared to only 44% of Caribbean, African Caribbean. All right, so why are African Caribbean? And we know that they're not dumb, right? But this book goes into also IQ. And now James Flynn, who won the Nobel Prize for his research in IQ, has come to the conclusion that IQ is not genetic, right? So the bell curve, which argued in the early 90s that Black kids were at the bottom of the genetic inability to, pass these standardized tests, James Flynn has proven them wrong. And a lot of the research that they did, a lot of people question it anyway. They argued that were superior in intellect and did better on IQ tests than Blacks. Whereas James Flynn comes and said, no, that's not true. In fact, IQ improves with age. That makes sense, right? That's what the old folks used to say around the fireplace, right? You listen to your elders because they know more. So as you grow older, you become more, and as a child grows older, you find that their IQ actually improves. And James Flynn also wrote a book entitled, Do Your Parents Make You Smarter? All right, does your parents make you smarter? And in that book, he argues, yes, that students, young people who come from households where parents have a high level of vocabulary, they tend to do better than students who come from homes where the parents are just ghetto and don't have no vocabulary, don't read, and so can't really articulate themselves to the kids. So he found that that it does make a difference who your household is. And Amy Chow, in her book, she documents one became a concert pianist, the other one became a violinist, and they're top in the world, right? But they are also excellent at academics. She said she never accepted anything but an A from her kids. And if they got a B, she would sit down with them for hours until they understood that math problem or that English teaching. Rather, they weren't allowed to go to sleepovers, right? And they weren't allowed to participate in the school play. Okay, they were just that's how they flex. That's how the Chinese flex, that the Asians flex. Then you got to get that spelling bee done. You got to get your maths done. You should be able to do calculus by the time you're 13. But if you look at us as Caribbean folks, we're not pushing that. We're not pushing that at the same way as Asian communities doing it, and as the yeah. So and Nigerians are like that too. So when you look at the SATs, as I said before, the scores are quite low for consistently. So you can't just accept that. And I think one of the things that we see with our people is that we have accepted that and normalized that. That seemed to be normal for us, that our kids are going to be scoring lower compared to other groups. And that what we have to look at is why have we accept that? Why we accept that as normal? Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about before the interview begins, I'm going to wrap up, is adinkra symbols, because that is something from our culture. And what we're very good at as Caribbean people and African people in general, because Africans on the continent are not much better than us when it comes to adhering to culture, especially when they like in Nigeria, they've been colonized, and they many of them see themselves as Anglophiles. And then you've got those on west coast of Africa who sees themselves as Francophiles. And so what that means is that you move away from anything that's too African. You don't want to be too involved with that. And you embrace it. So most of these elites sent their kids to school in France, in England, in America, to the top schools where you pay millions of dollars a year to send your kids to these schools, and because they don't regard their own culture. So let me just drop this on quickly. So what is adinkra symbols? You probably see these adinkra symbols. You've seen them before. And basically what I've done is I've taken them and I'm using them as teaching tools, right? Now, I'm not the only person who've taken these on. If you read the book from cover to cover, you'll find out that they have now been, and y'all don't know about this, but they've now been incorporated into physics at the highest level of physics, right? So where do the Europeans get their knowledge from? Africa. Their wisdom is coming from, that's the base of their knowledge. Even Plato and Aristotle studied in Egypt, right? Christ studied in Egypt and so on. So let me just read a simple little thing, some excerpts from this chapter. As mentioned earlier, the adinkra symbol originated from a long tradition that marks the unification of two ancient kingdoms, the Ashanti and the Gaiamanti people. The symbols were incorporated into the Ashanti kingdom after a war between the two neighbors, sparked by the hubris of the king of the Gaiaman, who attempted to copy the golden stool, a sacred symbol of the Ashanti people. Ashanti power and ancestry and cohesion. The adinkra symbol, through seamless assimilation, assumed a role of unifying strength and serving as a reminder of the unity that transcends rivalry. So the adinkra symbols was incorporated after that war between the Gaiaman people and the Ashanti people. And we have to understand that this symbol, or there's hundreds of them, these symbols are utilized by Ghanaians in almost every way. They wear them as clothes, they're on their buildings, they're in their books, they are part of their universities and so on. So it means a lot to them. As Malcolm Gladwell explores in Outlier, I know many of you read that, cultural legacies have deep roots and long lives and play such a role in directing attitudes and behavior that we cannot make sense of our world without them. By taking these cultural legacies serious, we can learn why people succeed and how to make people better. Okay, so it's important that when it comes to culture, that we have to stop ignoring our culture. And I see people come here wearing African clothing. That's fantastic. That is part of the re-education and the and elevation. When you are proud of your culture, rather than trying to assimilate and mimic and becoming sort of a clone of someone else's culture. If you look at Asians, they never do that. They just keep their culture. They're very proud of it, and that's where their success comes from. That's what this book argues. And there's lots I want to cover, but they're telling me to wrap up. So I can't even get through a quarter of what I want to talk to you about tonight. But so thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Dwight. That was fascinating, right? I want to do an exercise before we start the Q&A, if I may. Imagine or think about when you were going to school. Think about the first time you learned about Africa. Think about how you learned about the people, what it felt like the country might look like, what the environment might look like. And tell me the first word that comes to your mind. Anybody?
Be honest.
Africa? Yeah. Roots. That's what you learned when you went to school? That's what you thought about? Not what you know now as an adult. What you learned about when you were just going to school? What did Africa feel like to you?
So we learned that in Africa it was just pure poverty and people living in huts. That's what we learned in school.
Yeah. Okay. What do you think about?
Yeah.
Slavery. What else?
I feel like I learned very little. So it's like there's not much I can say without what everyone has said. You learn about the successful people of Africa, the history, religions, and stuff.
Okay. So that is the point that I think we're trying to make here, right? That what we learned about in school was the white monolingual version, what they felt Africa was. We didn't learn about the engineers and the astrologers and the architects and the scientists and the mathematicians and all of these brilliant people who were kings and queens. We learned the version that they wanted us to learn. And if we can come up thinking that we are coming from, our ancestry is poverty and slavery and nothing to think about, and we're still doing pretty okay, imagine what our children would be like if they had a stronger foundation to start with, right? That's the direction that we're going. All right. So I hope that clarified some of the reality of the situation that we are living in to everyone. So let's start off with asking you the question. Actually, sorry. That's what Dwight is confronting in chapter 1, how a racially biased curriculum quietly shapes identity, confidence, and even a child's sense of possibility. And I am going to say that's why it's important for kids to come to places like Island Space, where you can walk around and see people of your own ancestry and all the great and wonderful things that they have done in addition to the slavery and the other realities that they have come up from. So when you talk about a racially biased curriculum, is this the kind of disconnection that you are referring to, and what does it do to a child's motivation and self-worth over time?
That's a very good question. In that first chapter also, I believe in that first chapter also spoke about an actual anecdote where I talked about my students coming to me in England saying to me, in a book they were reading called Of Mice and Men. I don't know, maybe you're familiar with Joseph Steinbeck's book of Mice and Men. And in that book, the N word is used a few times. At one point, Curly's wife, because she has no name, threatened to hang Crooks, the only black person on the plantation or farm, if he, he was trying to get her out of his quarters, and she'd gone in there, and he knows that if she's found in his quarters, that's lynch. He's going to get lynched, right? So she already said to him, look, I can get you strung up a tree so fast, it ain't even pretty. But what the students came to me and complained about was that the white teacher that was reading the book to them was using the N word. And she felt it was her right to use that word. You know what I mean? Because it was in the book. So they felt that she was doing it, so it shows that there's still the movement. And they weren't on a slave plantation, but the N word still carries that stigma. It's also a traumatic word. No matter how people go, I'm taking back that word. We're the only people who take back words that are harming us and using them. And that's what I mean by the racially biased curriculum, is when you have teachers who are teaching the curriculum but are ignorant of the people they're teaching, about the culture of the people they're teaching. So you find that there's a lot of the curriculum itself doesn't really recognize the struggles of African kids, doesn't really sympathize with their struggles. So, and it's biased in the sense that it undermines African culture. It undermines, and you can, how you undermine something. If I came into this room and I never, let's say, okay, say we're friends or something, or maybe we're acquaintances, but I ignore you, right? My culture is over or not, where I can learn something. When we think of this administration banning over 591 black books, this state that you all live in, they've already banned the books. A lot of the books have been banned. In fact, AP African American history, I believe they've banned that. And they're also talking about introducing a curriculum about the benefits of slavery. So this is what I'm talking about. So that means your pain, your struggles, that your ancestors are undermined. It's almost like and you have to understand how racism works. The fact that in a racialized way, or in a monolingual, monocultural curriculum, what I mean by that, mono means one, right? Monolingual mean English. Any other language they don't respect that, right? And also monocultural, your culture don't matter, right? So you learn our culture, and that's what's gonna get you by. If you want to bring your stuff in, it seems almost like you feel uncomfortable bringing in your own stuff, and that's why the curriculum is biased. That's why it's racially biased, because it uplifts white culture and undermines Hispanic, Black, the Asian may get away with certain things, but Hispanic and Black people, their culture is a sideline.
What was the moment or experience that made you decide that this is right? You have to do it right.
Because teaching for nearly 30 years in the British and American school system, and being on the African continent as well, and looking at education over there, I realized that how could anybody just sit back and just accept that Black children will always score lower on standardized tests? Why is it that in the UK, African Caribbean are still scoring lower than whites and Asians? Africans from Nigeria do well, but that's just a very small cohort right there. The majority of Black students are still doing poorly. Right here in the US, if Black children are still scoring 200 or 100 points lower on the SATs consistently for over 40, 50 years, come on. What is the school system really doing to address that? And I decided I'm going to address it.
So you analyzing the circumstances that you were
Yeah, being in it. And being in it, knowing that the kids I teach are very intelligent, But you have to also understand that the system dumbs down your kids because if they're too precocious or whatever, too, erudite, that can be seen as threatening, aggressive, because they don't understand culturally, because of the white sort of consciousness and racism, they're programmed to see any kind of like behavior from Black people and Black students that are too forward as aggressive and so on.
Outspoken for them is aggressive for us.
Right, exactly. Well, outspoken from, us being outspoken is aggressive to them. And also, you're asking, if you interrupt the teacher to correct them or ask a question and you're Black, that's seen as you being insubordinate, yeah. Because the system is designed, we talk about pouring into people, but when we talk about pouring into people, we're talking about pouring into you so that you can be transformed. Whereas they're talking about pouring into you so they can transform you and make into their own image and likeness. Yeah.
What does it do to a child when they do not see positive representations of themselves, when they are not poured or they're poured into so that they can turn it to somebody else and they're not seeing themselves as
Yeah.
powerful or
Yeah.
change makers or whatever?
You just said the word powerful. What that does, it disempowers them. Yeah, it's about this, I'm not the only one who's written about this. There's a guy called, and every teacher has to read this theorist. His name is Paulo Freire, and he wrote the book. What's it called? Just jumped out my head, but this book is quite popular among teachers. It's called Pedagogy of the Oppressed.
Yes.
Yeah, Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And basically, he studied inner city kids in Brazil and looking at how the education, pretty much the lack of representation in this curriculum, in books that you're reading, everybody buying or whatever, that lack of representation, lowers the self-esteem and confidence of those children. Okay, they don't feel like they can compete on the same level as their white counterparts. Also, if the teacher is ignoring you, or if the teacher is not encouraging you, or feel you're a lost cause. And then you've got the economic system now, the school to prison pipeline, where students are deliberately derailed and punished, and then filtered into that prison system. And that's happening in the UK. We got PRUs, that's made up, a lot of those PRUs, pupil referral units, are made up of Black students, Black kids who's struggling. Those students struggling within the school system, not because they are deranged or crazy or whatever, how they make them out to be. They're struggling within those school system because there's a lack of representation for one. When they go in there, their culture is not at all talked about or discussed, except for Black History Month. And a lot of times the kids are rebelling against that. Believe you me, your child instinctively knows, and they will just stand up to a teacher because they know that teacher doesn't really care about them or doesn't really want to see them excel, or that teacher doesn't really understand their intersectionality, right? So as a result of that now, how would you feel when you act out sometime? Yeah, you got some students who are really good and very disciplined, and because they're getting that at home and they're getting the encouragement at home, they're getting all that stuff, and then they come to school, they're ready to, and that's what my book is arguing. If you start to teach a child at home the culture and giving them the Adinkra symbols and so on, when they want who they are, you see? So that's the difference. So you're coming from a background, I'm not going to talk about COINTELPRO and all that stuff. My book touches on that too. It goes very deep. Where the Black communities were flooded with drugs and so on. Not to mention in the 90s in America, I remember when I was going to school, there was a theorist, a linguist, who legitimized Black American way of speaking. I can't remember his name right now. And they call it Ebonics. And then they would start to teach and bring Ebonics into school, and Black people railed up against Ebonics because of the fact, oh, well, I want my people to learn standard English. You see what I'm saying? But what they didn't know, when I teach Ebonics, I teach linguistics at A levels in England. And when we look Ebonics, we realize that it's the students or the kids who speak Ebonics and the communities that use it, their use of language is so nuanced that it's far superior to middle class whites and the way they use language. But if we don't take the time to study and respect what we are generating and producing, our culture, and I'm not talking about hip hop culture because that's a completely different thing and that's undermining and that's been co-opted and corporatized and so on and what they're putting out. And we are seeing that coming out nowadays. They've been told to put out negative stuff to undermine the community and so on.
Yeah, it's like I think of you know, when Spanish people will say it's easier for me to say it in my language and they do the hands and you know, the body language communicates much more effectively than just words might do. Or you might hear words like Schadenfreude, is that the word in German? That means I take pleasure in somebody else's misery. There's not a word for that in somebody else's language.
Yes.
So the Ebonics and the even Patois,
Right,
Creole,
and patois.
the way we express ourselves is superior in some ways because the way it carries the message better than standard
Do you
English.
remember that book named Throw Back Crebe? Yeah, you have a book that come out called Throw Back Crebe. And basically, the book that talk about how patois was developed. I did research. I wrote 100 pages on this when I was in my undergrad, and I had a professor called Marilyn Imel, and she was like, you know, how his book and he write enough poems in a patois. Enough other people in Jamaica who did that, but the purpose of that was to show the power of patois and how, or Jamaican English, and how it actually represents the revolution and the independence of Jamaicans.
I don't want to keep us too much longer because people want to buy your book and,
Yes.
and you know, so I'm going to ask you maybe 2 or 3 more questions and then move on to if the audience has questions. You describe the Adinkra system as a pathway to self-mastery, motivation, and resilience. And you advocate for the teaching of this for self-empowerment for children. Can you share maybe, or no, what changes do you see in children when they begin to learn through cultural symbols? Or can you explain how you use cultural symbols to teach this? And then what changes you see in the children when you start to teach in this way rather than using a Eurocentric system?
That's a very good question. And Adinkra symbols are ideograms. Okay, ideo come from the word idea, ideograms, and basically they're quite powerful way of teaching. They come from languages like Chinese languages, where people use symbols to communicate. Have you ever noticed that Chinese use symbols? Right? Okay. Look at the Chinese language. It's not like Western, letters and whatever, alphabet. They use symbols. If you look at the Jewish language, they use symbols, like the name of for God, for example, the way it's written, and so on. It's because, and then each symbol is packed with metaphors and meanings and proverbs and this and that, so it just shows you that they were communicating on a that they weren't just communicating on one level. It wasn't just language for language sake, which is what they call the European use it, commerce, mercantile, contracts, you know what I mean? That's how they use it. When you look at the Hebrew language, or when you look at the Chinese language, people are using language to communicate on a spiritual level, metaphysical level, mathematical, historical, social, right? And that's how we use language. I mean, I'll be talking to you and something happened, I'm gonna say, sorry for Magadan, turn around back. You know what I mean? It's like all of a sudden I throw a proverb in there, and we could be talking for a while, no proverbs have come out, you know what I mean, out of our conversation, because we're communicating through metaphors and symbolism. Now, when you look at a Adinkra symbol, they're the same thing. When you look at hieroglyphs, the ancient Egyptians used hieroglyphs to communicate their highest principles. the scientific level that they are communicating on that most people here can't comprehend, right? And angles and so on. And they were the first one. They were the one who came up with like millimeter measuring using a droplet of water to which consistently created a millimeter, and they use that to create a packed with information. So when you teach your child a symbol, showing them what the symbol represents, for example, how the symbol was constructed, what proverbs associated with that symbol, what spiritual concept is associated with that principle, that symbol, what affirmation is linked to that symbol, and so on. That becomes like it teaches them to think on a multidimensional level, right? And it also creates pride in their culture because it knows that was created by Africans and that we communicate differently, and kids love that. In fact, how we create different, we communicate differently as Africans. Yeah, different from white people. How did they communicate? You know, all of that stuff just makes them even more intrigued and interested in what we do and in our culture. So Adinkra symbols are something that you can play with your child in the sense that you could take one symbol, because I have lesson plans in here, by the way. So each of the symbols is attached to a lesson plan. So you can then use that lesson plan to sit down with your kid on a Saturday in the morning, talk to them about that symbol and say what it means, connect it to history.
Many parents may feel unequipped to teach these cultural symbols at home. What first step could they take tonight? What is one of the examples of the activities that they could do at home tonight?
Okay, the easiest one, most people here probably, there's two that's very popular among Westerners, Western blacks, Westerners. Okay, and the reason why I call them Westerners, but the Sankofa bird, right? How many times have you gone somewhere and see the Sankofa bird? It's like a bird that's walking, but it's looking behind it, and it's like it's picking up a seed from behind it, kind of, you know. And that symbol represents. The symbol states, you know, that go back to the past to correct it. Go back to the past to correct. So what it's saying is that the bird is going forward, but it's looking behind. So what it's saying that you can't really go forward. And Bob Marley talk about this as well. You know, you got to know your past before you got to know your history before you can know your your present. You can fully understand what's going on in the present, and then knowing your history, you then can plot a path to the future because you understand where you're coming from. So that bird, just that bird alone, you know, it's just back to that. Oh God, that's such a powerful idea to give to a child, telling them that they can fix the past. It's also telling them they can fix the past, which is a very metaphysical concept. Most people think they can't do anything about the past. So the past becomes an albatross around their neck or something they're pulling. What do you call it? An anchor. Whereas from an African perspective, you can always go and fix the past, right? It does not need to determine your future. So it's a very, very, very wicked concept. And then you've got Jinyame, which is a symbol also that looks like a chorus shell, right? And that's talking about if not for God, you know, which is it's what it's doing is saying that God is, you know, it's really teaches kids or adults about reverence for God, reverence for the Creator, reverence. You didn't create yourself, you know. It reminds you that there is a bigger power than you, a mightier force in you. So, which is not to say that that mighty power or force is in any way oppressive. It's just that there is a greater power that you can rely on, and that is shaping your destiny and so on. So you don't have to feel like you don't have anybody to back you up.
All right, we've talked primarily about two of the chapters in the book. Again, I want to just wrap it up so people can ask questions and then we can get some of your books sold. Are there any other major concepts in the book that we have not touched on this evening that you want to share?
Yeah,
before we open up for questions.
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest concept in the book is ancestor. And a lot of times We've been taught to think that in Western culture, and they trick you, they make you believe this, right? Because you know Africans deal with ancestor, not ancestor worship, but ancestor veneration, and it's not that us, you know. Mexicans do it too. You ever heard of El Dia es Muerto, the Day of the Dead? El Dia es Muerto, right? El Dia es Muerto is when Mexicans even go to the graveyard, go sit down with their ancestors and whatever, you know, and they're Catholics, right? And then you have Memorial Day for white folks, right? And you've got President Day, and you've got different days where they venerate their ancestors. But what are we doing as Black folks to venerate our ancestors? What are we doing? How are we canonizing? We're doing it more and more. You know, can we remember like Garvey, we'll talk about Garvey, we'll talk about Haile Selassie and things like that. But we need to bring that more into the whole because we can learn so much from our ancestors. And not only that, I mean, from a spiritual perspective, when you venerate your ancestors, and people say that the reason why Africa is in the situation that it is today is because it sold out the ancestors by turning away from the culture, turning away from, you know, when you turn away from your culture that your ancestors left you, I mean, they're not going to be standing up for you, right? And Africans, not just Africans, but Koreans believe this, Japanese, every Japanese house have a shrine. What you are doing? And then look at them, look at for them technology and how they're superior, and look at their culture, and look at they're way ahead, right? Chinese people, shrine.
When we do it, they call it black magic.
But when we do it, and that's why I want to, that was my initial statement, they fool us by letting us believe that when we venerate our ancestors, we are working black magic and we're anti-Christian and all this kind of stuff. Whereas even in the Bible, you know, Christ is asking them, who do people say I am? Some say you're Elijah. You know, Elijah did 100 years ago, you know, 200 years ago, right? But Christ accepted that, yes, I am those people. I am the answer, or they were my ancestors, and acknowledging his connection to the past and so on. So I want to leave people with that. Just that's in the book as well. There's a huge chapter on that. And one thing you gotta know about this book is that it's well researched. So there's nothing just coming off the top of my head and I spin it up. There's lots of information in there, quotations from different authors and different people and statistics and so on. So it's a well-researched book.
All right, can we give it up for Mr. Dwight Maxwell? And I'm gonna open the floor for questions. Does anyone have questions on the book? Yes.
Based off your book, do you have any personal experience that you relate to the character you talk about in the school system that you've never forgotten about?
Okay, so what your name is?
Kendra Williams, his niece.
Hi, Kendra, how you doing? Yeah, I mean, the thing about it, Kendra, I've got lots of experience about that. A lot of them are not my own. Some of them are my, you know, students because I work in the school system. So I witness every day how students are disenfranchised by that school system. I remember one school, I think I talked about this in the book, where I went into school and I was doing supply work because after we came out of lockdown, I decided to go back into the school system. The money didn't run out, the lockdown done, right? So basically, I went back in the school system, and I went to the school, and I had an 8th grade class, and there was a bad girl in there. When I say bad, like, you know, I mean, like, she just show up when she wants, and then we say things, she just suck her teeth, and, you know, curse me out if she needs to or whatever, you know, depending how she's feeling that day. And her name was Jade, and I remember I started, you know, to introduce myself to the kids, and as they got to know me, one of the things I do, I teach yoga. So in class, I have them do yoga, and they love it. And I also do meditation. So I'll have them sit down on the chair, they close their eyes, and they meditate. And they love the meditation. And they will always say to me, before I start a lesson, can we meditate? Right? And I will, you know, meditate with them and so on. And the meditation was to relieve the stress. Because even though they're in year 8, grade 8, you know, they have to be very stressful because they still have exams and stuff. So the kids started to get on board with it. They were doing yoga. They want to do it every day, and they want to do qigong and all kind of meditation. And Jade would sit there and not participate, right? And then one day, all of a sudden, Jade come up to me and give me our work. Never used to do nothing, you know. And then all of a sudden, and Jade have good handwriting, like neat, you know, and everything. Just hand me the book. And she started to come in class on time and all kind of stuff. She just started to transform. Unfortunately, Jade was being excluded permanently from the school. It turned out when I did research about her, for 1 year, she and her mom and her other sister, and her other sister was bad as well, lived and they didn't have no stove in the house. Right? So you can try and imagine who were willing to, you know, quick to get rid of her and so on. Yes, she was bad, but if you notice, I was beginning to transform Jay. And they're transformed because you know, especially work with black kids. I created a program in a school where we had a psychologist come in, and she brought in Black history into that as she worked with kids who are going to be permanently excluded, and when they start to learn about their history and culture, that transforms them. Any other questions?
Good evening, Madeline. Let's touch a point on venerating. So my question would be, how would you differentiate venerating versus worshiping or something being your idol? Because again, we come from a Christian family, Christian background, and you know, you just taught like if someone is dead, you just let them rest in peace, you know. And then also you get into well, anything that you idolize, it becomes your God, all of that good stuff. So how would you differentiate venerating your ancestors versus they becoming your idol or your worship?
That's a very good question. I knew you were gonna put it that way, and it's touched on in the book. And trust me, it's a good question. Veneration means that you honor your ancestors. Means that you honor their achievement, what they've done in life. It means that it comes from a cosmology, right? Which means cosmology means a worldview, and this is why colonizers always take away the language of the colonized, because the language of a people is their world. Once you remove the language, you're removing their identity, you're removing their cosmology, how they see the world, how they venerate, how they do everything. So basically, the what you gotta do is remember that one of the things that we teach in African spirituality is that people don't just die and that's it. Africans don't believe that, but it's not just Africans. Indians don't believe that either, right? Buddhists don't believe that. You know what I mean? A lot of other cultures don't believe that. Even the Catholics in Mexico, the Mexicans don't believe that. That's why they venerate their ancestors. It comes from and then you could look at it from a scientific perspective, because I also look at it from a scientific perspective in the book, which that we are energy. We are energy, and energy cannot be destroyed. Energy just transmutes and transforms into something else. So basically, when people die, their bodies die, but their energy lives on. Their essence lives on, and you ever feel like even somebody who passed away, because we got to remember that we have a lot of spookism, right? And people believe, oh, dopey, you feel, if you're like, yeah, how many of you have a dream about somebody who passed away, giving you a message or saying something to you? So we are still tethered to those who move on. It's not the relationship doesn't end because they move on to another level, another plane of existence. And we believe in an African spiritual system that they just move on to another level. They become an ancestor. They become even more powerful. That's why Marcus Garvey said, "Look for me in the whirlwind." There's a saying that Garvey says where he said, "Look for me in the whirlwind, look for me wherever in Africa or wherever." But yeah, so when you talk about concept like Messiah, for example, that also has ancestor attached to it because the prediction of Jesus coming was predicted from the Old Testament and so on.
So he was coming and he's supposed to be, the Jehovah's Witness believe that he's Adam, Adam's reincarnated and so on. So yeah, I think ancestor veneration is about just honoring the achievement of those who came before, not forgetting them. It's okay to have a photograph of a deceased relative. It's okay to acknowledge a deceased relative's contribution. Also, it's okay to talk to a deceased relative. Let's say, you know, just to, and people, what we do in Africa, we ask them for help with a situation. We'll ask them for help on something. And have you ever heard of the concept of pouring libation?
Yes.
Yeah, ever heard of that? Pouring libation is when you get a little white rum, or you get a glass of water and you get a plant in your house and you pour the water in there and you call the name of the, but you don't, what we do, one of the things that we do, we're not calling on a gangster. You know, you're not going to call on anybody who used to kill people. You know what I mean? You choose which ancestor you want to venerate, right? So you choose those who left a legacy and who did positive things in you know, just like how the Europeans salute those who died in World War II, you know, fire a gun for them and all that stuff, you know. They come every day, they honor Benjamin Franklin. Never stop talking about Benjamin Franklin. Build a statue for Benjamin Franklin. That's veneration. You see? Why are you building a statue for a dead man? Yeah, if you're so Christian, where are build statue for dead man from? You know what I mean? And they do it all the time. You know what I mean? They want to name that street in Washington, D.C. that used to be called Black Lives Matter into Charlie Kirk Street. You know what I mean? That's veneration, right? So basically, veneration is just acknowledging the contribution of those who came before and respecting them. So pouring that water in that plant is honoring and respecting that person's contribution and realizing also that that person is not gone, that one day you'll be an ancestor. Would you want to be remembered? Or do you want people to just forget about you and say, oh, them dead, let's get no worry about that, you know? We want to be remembered. So that's the reason why we do it. And there's a lot of power in it because those people represent your past. They're connected to culture, they're connected to history. If you forget about them, you're forgetting about just like how they wanted to forget about Nani and Paul Bogle and all the different people who fought for freedom. If you forget about those people, you don't teach it. That's why they don't teach it in school, because they want you to forget. Because when you forget, you're weaker. Because remember, when you remember like Queen Nzinga or Ya Santiwa, or Menes, the ancient Egyptian king who united the two lands. If you forget Emperor Selassie, all these people who did all these great things, if you just block them out and say, now remember them because they're dead or whatever, you know, then that's chunks of history that you're sort of like cutting out of your mind. And one of the things I mentioned in the book is that when the last emperor of Japan, right, he's still alive, when he became emperor, he went into the temples of Japan and called on his ancestors, and that was like televised, as he's gone in there to talk to the ancestors. The Westerners couldn't understand it, but the Japanese, who are very advanced people, knew what that's something that they practice.
We have one question over here. Anybody else with a question? That's going to be our last question for the evening.
No, we have one more question over there.
That's the last one.
Oh, good evening.
That's my mom.
It's Montel. And Mr. Maxwell, do you believe that education starts from in the home? Kids, do you believe that education starts from in the home?
Absolutely. Absolutely, Mom. I mean, most of what I learned came from you, Mom. You know what I mean? Me and her had an argument the other day, so, she said, me school, yo. He said, yeah, you send me to basic school, but then me take care of the rest of my education. I was like, No, that was hurtful. You see, you gotta be, you see that? That's the connection to ancestor and with your parents and so on. Yes, definitely, Mom. I mean, that's why I wrote the book, because most of exactly, that's what the book is about.
Right.
That's what the book is about. That's what the book is about. Absolutely.
Right. Everything comes from in the home.
Absolutely. 100%.
What's the question?
Yeah, give out a clap. That's absolutely correct. That is so true.
Good afternoon. So my name is Sadia. Congratulations. And
Thank you.
I'm going to read my questions so I can make sure.
Ooh, okay.
Okay, so in what way does understanding Black and African history challenge dominant historical narratives, and why is it important for students of all backgrounds for their intellectual growth?
Ooh, that's very good. Thank you for that question. That is, that's why we're here today. I mean, and why the book was written is because, and when I was writing this book, one of the things that came up was that all of the information in here can benefit all kids. And I remember I was speaking to Talib about this, and we're saying, she asked me, who's your audience? Who's your audience? I said, well, primarily Black people, but anybody can learn from this. And, for the way Black history transforms children, because, and we're not talking about just slavery, because I think one of the problems that we have with Black history, a lot of times when it's being taught, they begin it with slavery. And that's a very painful part of our history. But that's just when you look at Black history, it's a very, very small, that's a very small period in our history, 400 years. You're talking about, let's go back to ancient Egypt or Ethiopia. Ethiopia is the most mentioned place in the Bible. And if you go back, that's 3,000, 4,000, that's 5,000 years ago. So 400 years is a footnote, right? So it is important that children of other races learn Black history. And that's my whole point, is that history and culture should be taught equally in the schools. Why just focus on white man history? Why is it that we're just focusing on the Greeks, this? Why aren't they telling you that Plato and Aristotle studied in ancient Egypt? You know what I mean? And it took them years before they were admitted into the schools of Egypt. And almost everything, in fact, everything that Plato and Aristotle wrote about and gave to the Greeks came from Egypt. In fact, Plato had to kill himself, take hemlock, because of the fact that most of what he was publishing was seen as heresy, was seen as, they didn't understand it, because it was coming from the Egyptian. It was very high level stuff that they didn't comprehend. Pythagoras got his theorem from ancient Egypt. So I think the fact that they're not teaching our history in its wholeness in the school system is part of the reason why racism still exists. It's part of the reason why there's so much conflict in America today, as the far right or the MAGA are trying to assert themselves in order to take back power, because they're afraid of diversity. And they first attack Trump, attack DEI, and they say, let's wipe out all of the Black stuff from the school, critical race theory. And what critical race theory was doing was really healing the wounds. That's what it was really doing. Teachers were teaching students about the impact of slavery on a psychological level, but also revealing and unpacking all of the terrible things that were done in order that students could learn and understand really why African Americans are in the predicament, and not just African American, but African Caribbean, Africans in general on the continent, why things are the way they are today, so that white kids can develop compassion and empathy. Whereas what we're realizing now with MAGA is that they have a hate culture where they teach racism to their kids. Look at Charlie Kirk. Most of what Charlie Kirk was running around and talking about was that Black people were criminals, while the prison industrial complex so full of Black folks, not really telling the truth that the prison industrial complex is privatized and that black folks are given tougher sentences in order to fill those prisons and so on, and not talking about these, CIA, FBI plots to criminalize black people by introducing drugs into their communities and so on. And not only that, the disenfranchisement of those people coming from 400 days slavery and starting at the back of the line and still expected to be where their white counterparts are and so on. So that's why that question is so brilliant, because I hope that white teachers are going to be buying this book because of the fact that our history is world history. And when you learn Black history properly, it's transformative, because we are the ones who build the foundations of this earth. And if you're going to go technical with it and go to anthropology, the phenotype of white folks came onto this planet 6,000 years ago. They're saying between 12 and 6,000 years ago that phenotype, that kind of complexion came onto the planet. So you got to look at a lot of those ancient civilizations were black and brown. And we need to be teaching that to the kids and imagine what that's going to do to the young people when they find out. Right now it's been uncovered that the ancient Egyptians were black folks. I mean, it's obvious. You look at the cartouches and so on, you see them brown, or reddish brown or whatever. And so on, there's no white folks on there, but yet or even Arab, but yet they trying to spin this narrative that these people were white in order not to give credit to Africa for that civilization, and that's what we're dealing with. So this is why my mom says it begins in the home. Why parents need to buy this book and start using it, and it's not coming from me. In fact, when I tell people, when I pick up this book and I read it, I'm often amazed at what's written in it, because I'm like, whoa, where did it get, where did that come from? Because as with most form of art, and as writing is a form of art and stuff, there is some channeling that's going on in it. I mean, and then from a Christian perspective, if you're looking from a religious perspective, a lot of times we are inspired by God. The inspiration is coming from the God, or if you're Catholic, it could be coming from the holy angels, wherever, where the inspiration is coming from to write the book. And also, we also would argue that the inspiration could be coming from the ancestors as well. Okay? Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. I hope that answered your question. Okay. All right. Can we give him a round of applause?
And just be reminded, as that last word, that remember how we have been programmed ourselves. Remember that our children are being programmed in the same way. As mommy says, it starts at home. So it is incumbent on us and the parents and the educators to understand that we have to go back in history and tell the truth about where we came from, empower our young people to open their minds to the power that they have inside themselves. And this book is the start of that process, so we're going to just form a neat and tidy line at the back to purchase. How much was the cost of the book?
$20.
That's all.
Yes, and I think it's cheap for this book, and it is cheap. Listen, Routledge wanted this book. I don't know if you know who Routledge is. They are academic publisher, and if they had taken it, the reason why they didn't take it off my hand is because I didn't have any case studies in it, like that much case studies, like where I would have been documenting years of research. And the reason why it doesn't have that in there is because of the fact that I wrote it for the lay people, for regular people. Wasn't for academics. Right. Even though it has some academic feel to it, it's really not for academics. It's really a self-help book for the regular people. That's what it's for. So Routledge, that goes to show they would have sold this for easily $35 to $70. That's what they sell academic books for, because they expect only institutions to buy them and students.
And when is the audiobook coming available?
Very soon. The audiobook is coming soon. I'm in the process now of setting up the website, and we're creating more curriculums around it. And we're going to create it's going to be an opportunity for me to use this tool to train teachers, train parents, anybody who wants to learn this stuff more. I'm setting up a website for that.
So we're not just complaining, we're providing solutions. And the first solution is this lovely $20 book. We can take pictures, we're gonna take pictures with the book, not out, but we can take some island space, no pictures. But if you wanna do pictures up here first,
Yeah.
we can do one big group picture and then we can take pictures at the desk when we line up to purchase.
And there's food in the back. Please help yourself when it's time. Yeah.
Please give Mr. Dwight Maxwell a round of applause. This evening we have been, for those of you online, we have been discussing, it's not just about grades, it's about culture, just $20 available on Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And
Barnes and Noble.
And Barnes and Noble.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. I'm Khalid Thompson. Thank you to all of you watching online. And that's it. Any final words, sister?
Oh.
Excellent. Well, yeah, that's good. Okay.
Okay, that's a good idea.
Yeah, we can end the live stream.